Welcome to New Wave Teaching Lessons. If you're new here, don't forget to click subscribe. We upload videos every single week. In this series, we'll talk about Algebra 1, specifically Semester 1. Let's get started. Hi everyone, welcome to New Wave Teaching. This is our first video of the Algebra 1 series for Algebra 1 Semester 1. Before you move forward, I'd recommend downloading the follow along worksheet below in the description bar. Let's get started. For this topic, we are going to first go over the toolbox. So some vocabulary that we're going to need for this specific lesson is the word verify, because part of our goal there is the word verify. And basically what that means is to demonstrate that something is true. Operation is our next vocabulary word, and that is, some previous knowledge review, addition, subtraction, multiplication, and division. And then lastly, inverse operations. So there are operations, which you see above, and then there are inverse operations, which means they're just undoing each other. So an example of that might look, if I have addition, and then, of course, the inverse of addition or the opposite of addition is subtraction. Vice versa, though, if I have subtraction, the inverse or opposite of subtraction is addition. So it can go both ways. Same thing goes with division. Division is the opposite or inverse of multiplication. And multiplication is also the inverse or opposite of division. So like I said before, they go back and forth. All right, so going into our goal for this lecture, I can use inverse operations to verify the next step. So you see two of our vocabulary words in our goal. So it's very important that you understand those before moving forward. So let's try something simple. X plus 15 equals 35. And here is a simple sentence frame that we're going to try to fill in the blanks. So the goal is to get X blank on one side of the equation. Right now, X has 15 added to it. So we want to do the inverse and blank 15 to both sides of the equation. So that's why vocabulary is so important, because we need to understand what it's asking. So let's start with the first blank. The goal is to get X blank on one side. So whenever you're solving for an equation, of course, the goal is to get X either isolated, by itself, alone. All of those words would work just fine. So by itself, we'll go ahead and put by itself. But again, isolated, alone, they all mean the same thing. So going from there, the goal is to get X by itself on one side of the equation. Right now, X has 15 added to it. So we want to do the inverse and blank 15. So if I'm looking at 15, I see that it's plus 15. So the inverse, like we talked about in our toolbox, remember inverse is opposite with our tip. So the inverse or opposite of addition is going to be subtraction. So I'm going to subtract 15 to both sides of the equation. So going back through this, the goal is to get X by itself on one side of the equation. Right now, X has 15 added to it. So we want to do the inverse and subtract 15 to both sides of the equation. So we are now verifying with inverse operations how to solve this equation. Let's try another one. So now we have a little bit of a different situation. We have our variable is now second versus first, like the last equation. So we have a very similar sentence frame. So the goal is to get K blank. We kind of already know that one because we talked about that on one side of the equation. Right now, K has a negative 10 added to it. So we want to do the inverse and blank 10 to both sides. So we want to also remember inverse is opposite. That's going to come up very often for your tip. And then we know that we want to get K alone or by itself or isolated. I'm going to use a couple different words in this lecture just so you guys can see that they all have the same meaning. If I have a negative 10, the inverse of negative 10 holds the same inverse as if it was subtracting 10. So remember that a negative sign and a minus sign are the same exact thing. So if I'm trying to get rid of negative 10, the opposite of negative 10 would be a positive 10. So I need to add 10 to both sides to get rid of it. Okay, the next one, we got some different operations happening. And remember, don't forget, guys, that there's that follow along worksheet in the description bar. It has all of these questions plus some U-tries for you to try on your own and an answer sheet. So it is a free download. You can download that and print it out or even write it on a separate sheet of paper. It also works out. But there are additional questions for you guys to practice. So that's there for you if you need it. So in this question, we have x divided by 12 equals 50. So remember that slash is also a division sign, not just the division sign that you typically see with the two dots. So there's a couple different signs. So if I have a sentence frame like this, again, the goal is to get x or whatever variable, it could be a, it could be b. The goal is to get x what? We got to think of where do I want the x? So of course, we know that we want to get it alone, by itself, isolated. So again, I'm going to use different words so you guys can see that they all mean the same. Right now, x is being divided by 12. So we want to do the inverse and blank 12. So going back to my toolbox in the first slide of the video, you saw that the inverse or opposite of division was multiplication. So in order to get rid of that 12, I want to do the inverse and multiply 12 to both sides of the equation. And last question, we have 4k equals 52. So in this question, we have 4 and the k sitting right next to each other. So like I mentioned before, for operations, it doesn't always have to be, okay, 4xk or 4 times k. Sometimes you can't do that in this situation. You don't want to have an x and a k right next to each other because it'll look funky. So they put 4 and the k right next to each other. So you can imagine there's a little imaginary dot between the 4 and the k. So if this is red, 4 times k equals 52. So when I'm looking at my sentence frame to figure out how to solve this, the goal is to get k. What do you guys think? The goal is to get k by itself. Okay, if you said alone, if you said isolated, those are all correct as well. And it's what we want to get on one side of the equation by itself. And right now, k is being multiplied by 4, like we talked about. So we want to do the inverse and blank 4 to both sides. So go back to the toolbox if you need it. If k is being multiplied by 4, what is the inverse of multiply? Think about that. Inverse or opposite of multiply is going to be divide. Yes. So we want to do the inverse and divide 4 to both sides of the equation. Okay, if you guys have any questions, feel free to comment below. The next video, I'll have that on the next slide so you can continue in our Algebra 1 series. And I hope you enjoyed. Don't forget to subscribe. We post new videos each week. Have a wonderful day. Thank you guys for watching, and don't forget to subscribe and like our channel. Make sure you give it a thumbs up and hit the notification bell to never miss a video. Have a good one.